The year is 49 BCE, and Rome stands on the brink of civil war. Tensions have been building for years between two of the most powerful figures of the time. Gaius Julius Caesar and Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, known to history as Pompey the Great. Caesar, who has been building a reputation as a brilliant military commander through his conquests in Gaul, now seeks to extend his influence into Roman politics. But his ambitions are met with fierce resistance from the Senate, led by Pompey. This story begins with a key moment: the siege of Corfinium, a relatively small city, but one that would set the tone for the rest of Caesar's campaign in Italy. At the heart of the confrontation was Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, an ardent supporter of Pompey and a man determined to resist Caesar at all costs. But to understand how Corfinium became the setting for one of the first engagements of the Civil War, we need to step back and explore the political climate leading up to the siege. Caesar had spent years campaigning in Gaul, building not only his military prowess, but also his political capital. His victories in Gaul had brought him immense wealth and a loyal army, but they had also made him many enemies in Rome. The Senate, fearful of Caesar's growing influence, ordered him to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. For Caesar, this was unacceptable. He knew that without the protection of his legions, he would likely be prosecuted by his political enemies and his career brought to an end. His decision was clear. He would cross the Rubicon, the river that marked the boundary between Cisalpine Gaul and Italy, with his army, an act of war against the Senate. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon, he uttered the famous words, "Alea iacta est," the die is cast. This single moment set into motion a series of events that would plunge the Roman Republic into a bloody civil war. Caesar moved swiftly into Italy, his legions marching south with surprising speed and efficiency. As he advanced, many cities surrendered to him without a fight, either out of loyalty to Caesar or out of fear of his formidable reputation. Corfinium, however, was different. Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus had fortified the city and was prepared to resist. Domitius was a staunch supporter of Pompey and the Senate, and he believed that if he could hold out long enough, Pompey would send reinforcements. In his mind, Caesar's rapid advance could be checked, and the tide of the war turned in favour of the Senate. Domitius commanded a force of about 30 cohorts, roughly equivalent to 3 legions. While not an insignificant number, it was no match for Caesar's veteran troops in terms of experience and cohesion. When Caesar arrived at Corfinium, he quickly assessed the situation. He knew that a prolonged siege could be risky, as Pompey might indeed send reinforcements. But Caesar also knew that time was on his side. If he could end the siege quickly, it would send a strong message to other cities and provinces still on the fence about whether to support him or the Senate. Caesar decided to lay siege to the city, surrounding it with his legions and cutting off supplies. Inside the walls of Corfinium, the situation grew increasingly desperate. Domitius had overestimated his position, and as the days dragged on, it became clear that Pompey's reinforcements were not coming. Food supplies dwindled, and morale began to collapse. Domitius, realizing his mistake, attempted to flee the city in disguise. However, his own soldiers, frustrated by the lack of leadership and fearing Caesar's retribution, captured him and delivered him to Caesar. What happened next was surprising to many. Rather than executing Domitius and his men, Caesar pardoned them. This act of clemency was not born out of compassion, but rather cold political calculation. Caesar understood that a civil war would be long and bloody, and he needed to win over as many supporters as possible. By showing mercy, he hoped to convince others that surrendering to him would not result in punishment or death, but rather forgiveness and even reward. The siege of Corfinium ended without the kind of bloodshed that would later characterize Caesar's civil war. It was a decisive psychological victory for Caesar. His enemies saw that he was not only a brilliant tactician, but also a shrewd politician, capable of turning enemies into allies. With Corfinium in his control, Caesar now had a secure base in central Italy, and he quickly turned his attention to Pompey, who had retreated to the port city of Brundisium. The aftermath of the siege rippled throughout Italy. News of Domitius's surrender and Caesar's clemency spread quickly. Many cities that had been hesitant to declare their loyalty now swung in favor of Caesar. The Senate's forces, scattered and disorganized, could not mount a coordinated defense. Even among Pompey's ranks, there were whispers of doubt. Could Caesar truly be defeated? Could Pompey, despite his reputation as a great general, muster enough support to stop Caesar's seemingly unstoppable advance? For Domitius, the siege of Corfinium was a humiliation. He had placed his faith in Pompey, only to be abandoned and forced to surrender. While Caesar had spared him, Domitius would remain a bitter enemy of Caesar for the rest of the war. He would later join forces with Pompey once more, fighting against Caesar in the brutal campaigns that followed. But for Caesar, the siege of Corfinium was a masterstroke. It allowed him to consolidate his power in Italy without the need for a major battle. It demonstrated his willingness to be merciful, but also his capability to be decisive and ruthless when necessary. Caesar's march through Italy would continue unabated, and the stage was set for the next confrontation at Brundisium, where Pompey would make his stand, or so he thought. As we close this chapter of Caesar's civil war, it is important to reflect on the significance of these early engagements. The siege of Corfinium may not have been the bloodiest or the most dramatic of Caesar's campaigns, but it was pivotal in shaping the course of the war. It showcased Caesar's leadership, his ability to inspire loyalty, and his capacity for strategic thinking. It also set the tone for the brutal and unforgiving nature of the conflict that was to come. For Rome, this was just the beginning. The city that had once prided itself on its republican ideals was now on the verge of tearing itself apart. The civil war would rage on for years, and Caesar's path to ultimate victory would be filled with challenges, betrayals, and battles that would leave their mark on history. But for now, Caesar had secured his foothold in Italy, and the fate of the Roman Republic hung in the balance.